Hey everyone, welcome back. It seems like every time you turn around, there's another story about how fast places like St. Johns County are growing.
Yeah, it really makes you think about what all that growth means for the people who already live there.
Right. And today we're going to zoom in on one very specific example of this proposed development called Water Lily, a 3,000 home project that's making a lot of people say, "Hold on a minute."
For sure. We've been digging into the local news and what folks are saying online to try and piece together exactly what this water lily thing is all about and, even more importantly, what the community thinks about it.
So what we're going to do today is really break down the Water Lily proposal,
Hmm.
the nuts and bolts, and try to get to the bottom of why there's so much pushback against it.
Exactly.
Okay, so first things first, where exactly is this Water Lily development supposed to go?
So they're looking at a pretty big piece of land out on County Roads 214 and 13 North.
Okay.
If you're familiar with the area, that's about 15 miles west of where I-95 meets CR-207 and about 13 miles north of Hastings.
Oh,
And we're not talking about a small plot of land here. This is a sizable chunk, about 11,118 acres.
wow. Okay. So who's the company behind all this?
So the developer is Aegis Gibson LLC, and they're based out of Miami. But the interesting thing is the folks actually running the project are from St. Johns County and Jacksonville.
Huh, interesting.
The land itself is currently owned by a Jacksonville company called Boomi CR214 LLC.
Gotcha. And what exactly are they proposing to build on all those acres?
Well, the initial plan calls for up to 3,000 homes, and these would be age restricted. Although there's a little caveat there. They've said that could change if the county decides a school needs to be built.
Okay.
On top of the houses, they're also planning for a whopping 280,000 square feet of amenities and commercial space.
Wow. That's a lot of building.
Yeah, it gives you an idea of the sheer scale of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it also makes you think about how many people would be moving into the area.
Yeah.
So what's the timeline for all of this? When are they hoping to have it all done?
They're aiming for a full build out by 2038. And it's interesting, they actually got the name water lily from the Timucun word tukoi.
Really?
Yeah, it means water lily. And they're trying to present this as a sustainable development, even making comparisons to a place called Southern Village in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Hmm. So what does that mean, though, sustainable development? I mean, especially when you're talking about building this much in an area that's, still pretty rural.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? When you see developers using terms like sustainable development, especially for a project of this size, you really have to dig deeper and see what they're actually doing. Are they talking about just making the buildings energy efficient, or are they actually considering like the impact all these new residents would have on the environment and the community as a whole? It sounds like the residents aren't just looking for green building materials here. They're worried about the bigger picture.
Right, right. And I guess you have to wonder about those comparisons they're making to Southern Village.
Exactly. Southern Village is much smaller, both in terms of the number of homes and the land it covers.
Hmm. Okay, so this proposal went before the St. Johns County Planning and Zoning Agency, right? The PZA. What happened there?
So on April 3rd, just a couple of days ago, the PZA unanimously recommended that the county commissioners deny the comprehensive plan amendment needed for this water lily project to go ahead.
Wow, unanimously.
Yeah, and this came after a whole lot of people from the community spoke out against it, which we'll definitely get into a bit later. It's also worth noting that the PZA actually turned down a request from the developer's rep to reschedule the presentation because they wanted to have an environmental specialist present.
Hmm.
Now, that could mean a couple of things. Maybe the PZA felt like they already had enough information to make a decision, or maybe they were worried about delaying things even further, especially with all the concerns people were raising.
That makes sense. So basically, for this water lily project to even be considered, they need to change the county's comprehensive plan.
Exactly. It's like the county's big long-term plan for development, and the PZA saying no to this change is a pretty big deal. It's a major roadblock for the developer.
Okay, so it sounds like traffic is a major worry for people.
Oh, absolutely. People are really worried about the roads getting even more crowded, especially County Road 214. And, this being a coastal area, hurricane evacuations are a big concern too.
Right, of course.
What's interesting is that this traffic thing came up even when people were talking about a different project, that Agri-Hood proposal that got denied a while back. People were already raising red flags about traffic problems on State Road 16, particularly around the International Golf Parkway area.
So it's not just about this one development. It sounds like traffic is a big frustration in general across St. Johns County.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a bigger underlying issue that's bubbling up with all these new developments being proposed.
Makes sense. And it seems like infrastructure in general is another big sticking point for people. Things like schools and healthcare.
Right. People are worried about schools getting overcrowded and hospitals and clinics being stretched too thin. It's that classic problem of growth happening faster than the infrastructure can keep up with it. And it's not just about, like, having to wait longer at the doctor's office.
Right, exactly.
It's about having access to quality education for your kids and making sure everyone in the community has access to health care when they need it. When these concerns are being voiced so loudly, it tells you that a lot of folks feel like things are already pretty strained as they are.
So it's not just about convenience. It's really about the essential services that people rely on.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about traffic, infrastructure, but it doesn't stop there, right? There are also some pretty big environmental concerns being raised.
Absolutely. This development would be built on land that's currently being used for farming, which is a major concern for a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes sense. This area is zoned for rural use and agriculture, so losing that farmland would be a big change.
It's not just about losing some open space. These farms are important for the environment.
Right.
Healthy soil, they help absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, they provide habitats for wildlife. And then on top of that, you have the concerns about water resources being strained and the impact on air quality with all the construction and traffic that would come with a project like this.
Right. So the environmental worries go way beyond just losing some pretty fields.
Exactly. It's about the broader ecological impact on the whole area.
And then there's this whole idea of how this development could change the character of the community. I've even seen the term leapfrog development being thrown around. What does that even mean?
So when people talk about leapfrog development, what they're getting at is that instead of building closer to existing towns and infrastructure, this project would kind of jump over those areas and go further out into what's currently more rural and agricultural. And that kind of scattered development can create problems. It can put a strain on resources in the new area, and it can even leave gaps in development closer in. For the folks who live on CR 214, they're worried that this kind of project would completely change the feel of their community. They don't want to see it become just another sprawling suburb. They want to hold on to that rural, agricultural character.
Right. It's about preserving a way of life, really.
Exactly.
And it sounds like a lot of people are getting pretty frustrated with how the county's comprehensive plan is being handled. There's this sense that it's being changed too often just to make way for more and more houses.
Yeah, that's definitely a sentiment that's coming through loud and clear. I mean, the comprehensive plan is supposed to be this long-term vision for the county, a guide for responsible growth. But when it feels like they're constantly changing it, it starts to feel like it's less about protecting the community's interests and more about just rubber stamping whatever developers want to do.
Right. Like, what's the point of having a plan if you're just going to keep changing it?
Exactly. And that can really erode people's trust in the process.
Yeah, definitely. So it seems like there's a lot of opposition to this Water Lily project.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the news reports mention that dozens of residents, including farmers, spoke out against it at that PZA meeting. And then there's that Change.org petition that's going around. It's already got over 700 signatures. It really shows you just how strongly people feel about this.
Yeah, that's a lot of people making their voices heard.
It's not just a handful of folks. It's a whole segment of the community that's really concerned about what all this development could mean for them and for St. Johns County as a whole.
Okay, so the developer has come up with a few ideas to try and address some of these concerns, right?
They have. For example, they've proposed building an access road through the property to try and divert some of the traffic off of CR 214.
Okay. But honestly, does that really solve the problem when you're talking about a development this massive? Will that really make much of a difference in the overall traffic situation?
That's the thing. Directing some through traffic off of 214 might help a little bit in that specific spot, but it doesn't really address the elephant in the room. You're adding 3,000 homes, businesses, more people driving every day, and that's going to have a ripple effect on all the roads in the area. It's not just about CR 214. It's about all the major roads that people rely on and those evacuation routes, too.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit like they're trying to put a Band-Aid on a much bigger issue.
Right. It's a pretty targeted fix when the problem is much broader.
Exactly.
And they've also talked about planting 10,000 trees, which, at first glance sounds like a good thing for the environment. But how much does that really offset the loss of actual working farmland?
Planting trees is definitely a positive step. But it's not a simple one-to-one trade-off when you think about the ecological benefits that farmland provides.
Right, like we were saying earlier, there's more to it than just having trees.
Exactly. Farmland plays a crucial role in maintaining healthy soil, managing water resources, and supporting specific types of wildlife. So, while planting trees is good, it doesn't necessarily make up for the loss of those existing ecological functions that the farmland is already providing.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens next. What are the next steps in this whole process?
So the water lily proposal is going before the St. Johns County Board of County Commissioners on May 20th. And here's something interesting. Commissioner Ann Taylor actually proposed holding this meeting in the evening at 5:00 p.m., specifically so more people can attend. A lot of folks work during the day, so this gives them a chance to be there and make their voices heard.
That's a good point. So, considering that the PZA unanimously recommended denying the project and there's all this public opposition, what's the feeling about how the county commissioners might vote?
Well, based on the PZA's recommendation and the level of pushback we've been seeing from the community, it seems likely that the county commissioners will also vote against the Water Lily project. But it's crucial for people to understand that staying involved is still really important. Showing up at that meeting on May 20th and continuing to voice their concerns directly to the commissioners can make a real difference. Public participation is a huge factor in these decisions.
Absolutely. And this whole situation really reminds me of what happened with that Agrihood project, the one that was proposed and ultimately denied. Can you remind us about that one?
Right. So that was back in November 2024. And the proposal was for a massive agrihood development on CR 214 with something like 3,300 homes. It was actually located about 8 miles east of where they're proposing this water lily project.
Oh, okay.
That project was also met with a ton of opposition, mostly because of traffic concerns, and in the end, both the PZA and the county commissioners unanimously voted it down.
So they shut it down completely.
Yeah, completely.
And even though that was a win for the people who opposed it, it seems like there's still a lot of anxiety about overdevelopment in St. Johns County.
Absolutely. People are still worried about developers coming in and proposing these massive projects without really addressing the concerns of the people who already live there.
It feels like there's a real pattern here, and people are starting to notice.
Exactly. The Agrihood situation showed everyone that when the community comes together and speaks up, they can actually have an impact. But it also seems to have put people on high alert. They're paying close attention to what's happening with proposals like Water Lily, and they're ready to fight back against projects that they think will hurt their quality of life and change the character of the county for the worse. The Agrihood situation was a really clear example of that.
Yeah, it set a precedent for community activism in a way.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is that we're hearing that the Agrihood project might actually be coming back. They might be submitting a revised proposal to the PZA and the Board of County Commissioners.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, and that just goes to show that this issue of development and how it's handled isn't going away anytime soon. It's an ongoing conversation in St. Johns County, and a lot of residents are still unhappy with what they see as developers pushing too hard and not really taking their concerns about traffic and infrastructure seriously.
It's like a tug of war between development interests and the community's vision for the future.
Exactly.
So to kind of sum up everything we've talked about today, this Water Lily development, 3,000 homes on a huge piece of farmland, is facing some major pushback from the community. The PZA has already recommended that it be denied, and the concerns they've raised seem to really resonate with the people who live here.
Yeah. The biggest concerns revolve around traffic, the strain on schools and healthcare, and the environmental impact, especially the loss of valuable farmland.
Right.
And then there's this whole feeling that the county's comprehensive plan is being changed too easily just to accommodate more development, which is a really big concern for people.
Right. It's like they feel like their voices aren't being heard in the process.
Exactly.
And now the county commissioners are scheduled to vote on this on May 20th. And it seems like the community is really hoping they'll follow the PZA's lead and deny the project.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Given everything we've learned today, from the PZA's unanimous denial to the overwhelming public opposition, it seems pretty clear that the St. Johns County Board of County Commissioners should also vote to deny the Water Lily project.
I agree.
And doing so would really send a message to developers that they can't just ignore the community's concerns about things like traffic and infrastructure.
It would show that the county is listening and that they're taking those concerns seriously.
Right. Because ultimately, this whole situation is part of a much bigger story that's playing out in St. Johns County and really in a lot of fast-growing areas. It's about a community that's grappling with the challenges of growth. and trying to make sure that development happens in a way that benefits everyone, not just the developers. And we saw this same sentiment play out with the denial of the Agrihood project, and the fact that that project might be coming back just shows that this is an ongoing issue that people are going to keep fighting for.
Exactly. This isn't just a one-time thing. It's a conversation that's going to keep happening.
Right, so here's something for everyone listening to think about. What do you want the future of St. Johns County to look like? How can we balance the need for development with the need to protect the things that make this community special, like the rural character, the environment, and the quality of life? It's a question that the residents and the county leaders are going to have to keep wrestling with as more and more development proposals come their way. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive,
We appreciate you listening.
and we'll see you next time.
See you then.